The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The South Holland series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles, 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Hello folks, welcome back to South Holland for the first time in a long time. It's been ages since I've been in this part of Lincolnshire. Now behind me there you can see a very interesting building. That's going to be the last landmark on what is a mega walk around here. And on this walk we're going to be learning about a guy who knew a thing or two about Australia. This is Donington. Donington, Dunners Farm. Welcome back South Holland. It's been a little while, but we make a triumphant return to the southern Lincolnshire district with a big village. This is Donington, not to be confused with the Donington in Leicestershire. This, the Lincolnshire version, lies close to the border with North Kesteven between Sleaford and Spalding. It's 11 miles away from Boston too. It's sited on the A152 and is bypassed by the A52. The parish includes the hamlet of Northorpe and sits within the fens, falling as it does within the area covered by the Black Sluice Internal Drainage Board. Donington is the birthplace of the explorer Matthew Flinders, and he was reburied here in 2024. The Flinders name can be found all over Donington. It's the name of a school and a park, and in the central marketplace there's a statue of the man himself. We'll be learning about who he was and why he was so important historically in this video. Donington was a vital village on the route between the Wash and the Midlands. The road which traversed it in Roman times was called the Salter's Way, and it was designed to carry salt between the two places. Being on the route dominated by travellers, Donington therefore grew, and by the 18th century had grown big enough to attract travelling theatrical companies. These were said to have been entertaining enough to pique the interest of a surgeon, none other than Matthew Flinders' father. Today it remains a pretty big village and a thriving one at that. Let's wander around it and bring Donington and Matthew Flinders to life. We begin proceedings with the hamlet of Northorpe, which is also within the parish of Donington as well as the main village itself. Northorpe literally means northern outlying settlement, and that's an accurate name, perfectly describing its nature in comparison to its parochial neighbour. The history of both Northorpe and Donington is connected to the Vikings and the Romans. It's believed the Romans founded Donington, but they may have also had a hand in Northorpe's development as well. The Vikings raided the area in 870, destroying a monastery built by St. Botolph. Modern Northorpe developed around a large dairy farm, a 19th century farmstead with a detached farmhouse and large sheds. Other than that, it's a quiet, peaceful little hamlet. There's not a lot more to it than that, really. Northorpe sits to the north of the A52 bypass, which separates it from Donington. Skirting its northern edge, the bypass opened in 1989. It cost £1.8 million to build, and work began on it in October 1988. It was supposed to take 45 weeks to construct, but in what was an unusual piece of supreme efficiency for Lincolnshire County Council, yes, I went there, it opened 3 months early. Okay, so now we've crossed the A52 and we are in Donington village itself. Now this is a big long walk. There's loads to take in on this walk. It'll take me a good 2 hours, I think. Behind me there, we've got the local co-op. There's a story behind that. Kicking off our main walk in Donington itself is a co-op store. This is pretty new, added to the village within the last couple of years. It was completed in 2022 and includes some swanky new mod cons, such as self-checkouts, a hot food counter, a customer toilet, and a free bicycle repair station. Local school children were invited to cut the ribbon on the new store. The site upon which it stands was well known to most locals. It was a family agricultural engineering business and latterly a tractor dealership. The co-op is far from being Donington's only business, as we'll see later when we hit the marketplace. The next major landmark in the village is pretty hard to miss. This is Donington's parish church, dedicated to St Mary and the Holy Rood. It's a Grade 1 listed building. The church is almost a complete combination of early decorated and late perpendicular styles. Its chancel, however, is mainly early English. The tower and spire combined rise to a height of some 240 feet. The chancel walls, built of irregular rubble masonry, incorporate some of the oldest parts of the building. The oldest known part of the church is the east wall, where two doorways, one each side of the holy table and now walled up, seem to indicate that a chapel for relics once existed. The large 15th century window above the altar was enriched with stained glass in 1884 and shows the Ascension of Christ. Below the window and behind the altar is a beautiful Victorian Gothic reredos, which shows the four evangelists in a marble mosaic. The furniture includes some interesting items. The pews are of stained deal and replace the huge 6 feet high box pews that were removed in 1868. By the west door is what at first glance looks like an old sentry box, but it is in fact a hood placed at the head of an open grave to shelter the vicar from bad weather during a burial. Inside the tower hang the 8 bells of Donington. The first mention of a bell was in 1529. The oldest of the present bells was hung in 1743, and in 1953 2 new trebles were added, making a complete octave. The Ruby Hunt Centre is quite interesting. This was founded in 1982 as a pop-in centre after sterling work by a handful of volunteers who raised funds to establish the centre in a second-hand porter cabin. Over the years, it provided a meeting place for morning coffee and social gatherings. It's also a venue for the Wednesday Luncheon Club, serving a 3-course freshly cooked meal for the elderly and disabled of the area. Within 18 months, a second used porter cabin was added to cope with the increased demand for services and facilities. Ruby Hunt, one of the original volunteers, was awarded an MBE for her sterling work to the community. By 2002, the porter cabins were coming to the end of their serviceable life and were not able to offer the space required to fulfil the growing requirements. A new venue had to be found for the centre to continue, and this was proving difficult with no available sites in the appropriate area. However, in 2003, Donington's doctor's surgery moved away to Swineshead. Although that was not welcomed by the locals, it meant that the surgery building became available, thus solving the problem. Ruby Hunt was supposed to open the new centre but passed away at the age of 92, 2 weeks before the opening date. That's why it has the Ruby Hunt name now. It was opened in April 2006 by the Lord Lieutenant for Lincolnshire, Bridget Craycroft Ely. It's been a while since we saw any allotments. I still do find them, you know, but haven't featured them for quite a while. There's some here in Donington, as you can see behind me. They're for the fans, you know you are. Over the road is a former Methodist chapel, now in residential use. The chapel is indicated on the 1905 OS County Series map and has a foundation stone inscribed with a date of 1903. Donington's first Wesleyan chapel was built on Church Street in 1805 and continued until 1833, when a second chapel was built on the site. It only stood for 20 years. The present building was built on the same site in 1903, and the original schoolroom was retained and incorporated into the new building. We've got a residential area to pass through now, so let's fill in a bit of Donington's history as we walk. In Roman times, a road connected Wainfleet near Skegness on the east coast to Grantham. The road was known as the Salter's Way, and it was designed to carry salt from the Wash to the Midlands. By the time of the Domesday Book, the settlement was called Doningtonshire. It was a small hamlet with a lord of the manor and 16 salt works. Yes, salt was definitely a major commodity here. It had a recorded population of 65 households, modest maybe by today's standards, but that was astronomical in those times. Donington was large enough in the 18th century to attract travelling theatrical companies. In 1784, a surgeon named Matthew Flinders wrote about them, saying he was tolerably entertained. I think we can pass that off as a compliment. Flinders was the father of the famous explorer who had the same name. We'll learn some more about him shortly. Okay, so via a little footpath from that residential area, we've now hit Donington's main street, and we're going to be following this primarily for the rest of the walk, apart from a small section where I do need to deviate to the south. I'll tell you when we get to that point. Now behind me there you can see what used to be a petrol station. I was kind of hoping that that was still open today, in fact, because I will need some fuel at some point, but alas, it's no longer a petrol station. Behind the camera there's another building which used to be something else as well. It's a house these days, but this here used to be a pub. Let's talk a bit about it. Donington has a couple of pubs, but not all of them are open. This one most certainly isn't. This is the former Queen Inn, located almost bang opposite the old petrol station we've just seen. Simply known as the Queen to many, it was owned by the Solby, Sons and Winch Brewery until 1951, when it was purchased by J.W. Green of Luton. Not much is known about this one, so let's move on. Next we have the Donington Christian Fellowship Church. This was originally known as the Dial Church and was built in 1955. It's linked to a building that stands almost opposite, the impressive Dial Hall. As far as Methodism goes in the village, the furthest back record stretch is to 1856, when a free Methodist chapel was recorded in Donington. That was this very building. It was converted into a village hall in 1882 and became known as Dial Hall by 1931. When it closed as a chapel, the congregation merged with the Wesleyan or Primitive Methodists. Since becoming a village hall, the building has since been used for various public and commercial purposes. Literally, the next building along the street is a very important one. It's the Genesis residential home, which in itself isn't all that special, but where it stands is. This now occupies the site of Matthew Flinders' birthplace. The original building was demolished in 1904, and the building you see here was built in its place. A plaque on its wall tells us he was born in the village in 1774. The Black Bull Hotel is next. This originated as a public house and a shop in the mid-17th century before being refronted and extended in the 18th and altered again in the 19th and 20th. It's no longer a shop, but it's definitely still a pub. It's also a Grade 2 listed building. Okay, so here we are then in the marketplace opposite the Black Bull pub, and even though there's nobody here at the moment, apart from a couple of people wandering around, there's always one guy you'll find here. There he is. There he is. There's Matthew Flinders, the explorer who discovered the coastline of Australia, who charted the modern coastline of Australia. Let's discover a bit more about him. This statue is that of Captain Matthew Flinders, the famous explorer born right here in Donington. He was a Royal Navy officer, navigator and cartographer who led the first inshore circumnavigation of mainland Australia, which at that time was called New Holland. Donington's most famous son, it's he who was responsible for charting much of the Australian coastline. He's also credited as being the first person to utilise the name Australia to describe the entirety of that continent, including Van Diemen's Land, which is now Tasmania. He reckoned Australia was a title that was more agreeable to the ear. I have to admit, it beats previous names such as Terra Australis. Flinders was involved in several voyages of discovery between 1791 and 1803, the most famous of which was that circumnavigation of Australia. He was also involved in an earlier expedition where he and George Bass confirmed that Tasmania was indeed an island. Flinders was educated at Cowley's Charity School in Donington from 1780 and then at Reverend John Shingler's Grammar School at Horbling. In his own words, he was induced to go to sea against the wishes of my friends from reading Robinson Crusoe, and in 1789, at the age of 15, he joined the Navy. Returning to Britain in 1803 after his adventures at sea, Flinders was arrested by the French at the colony of Ile-de-France. Although Britain and France were at war, Flinders thought that the scientific nature of his work would ensure safe passage, but he remained under arrest for more than 6 years. In captivity, he recorded details of his voyages for future publication. This is where he put forward his rationale for naming the new continent as an umbrella term for New Holland and New South Wales, a suggestion that was later taken up by Governor Macquarie. Although he returned to Britain in 1810, he didn't live to see the success of his widely praised book and atlas, A Voyage to Terra Australis. He was buried in London, but the location of his grave had become lost by the mid-19th century. However, it was found a few years ago. Archaeologists excavating a former burial ground near Euston Railway Station for the HS2 rail project identified his remains there in 2019. Permission was later granted for him to be reburied in the north aisle of the Church of St Mary and the Holy Rood. It was where he was baptised, and as of July 2024, it's now where he's laid to rest. Following the discovery of his grave, the church here in Donington saw a surge of visitors. The Matthew Flinders Bring Him Home group and the Britain-Australia Society, as well as Flinders' direct descendants, campaigned to have his remains interred here. They got their wish. The coffin used for his reburial is a replica of the one he was originally buried in. Based on historical and archaeological evidence, it was made by one of the archaeologists who excavated his grave in 2019. The church displays too a recently discovered portrait, apparently of Flinders himself in his last years, attributed to the investigator artist William Westall. So this is the marketplace where the statue is located. Although officially a village now, Donington was once a market town, with market days held on Saturdays. The village also held agricultural fairs on May the 25th and October the 17th every year. Because it was such a busy place at one time, the village had many tradespeople living within it, including hosiers, manufacturers and basket makers. It might not be like that anymore, but it's still got plenty of life in it. In fact, you could even argue there's more these days. Over time, as Donington has continued to grow, its businesses have evolved. It's still a thriving community, even in this modern age. Shops and amenities in this central area include, or have included in the past, an independent opticians, a butcher's, a hairstylist, a flower shop, and a pets and produce outlet. Okay, now we're at the point where we need to deviate away from the main street temporarily because there's a section to the south of it. We need to get to that section by going through this big residential area. The south of Donington is a very residential part of the village. It's the bit that seems to be growing the most as well. So you see what I mean? Lots of residences down here and a lot of new streets as well. This one here, Bakewell Street, is a good example. Even on modern maps these days, these new areas aren't yet marked on. There's a big area to the south of this called Cowley Park, which even on Footpath Map, which is the one I use to plan my routes, that's not fully marked on the map yet. So I can't go down there and show you it because I actually don't know what I'm going to be walking around. This is why I'm staying on this street here. But actually staying on this street here is a good idea because there's a couple of landmarks down here we need to catch. One of them is a school. We've now come away from the main street for a short section further south. This here is Flinders Team Park, named after the explorer, of course. There are actually two parks which bear the man's name. When we head back to the main street again shortly, we'll pass through the other one, telling its backstory as we go. Down a track after the park, you'll find a playing field where the local football team play. Donington has football teams for two age groups. These are the Old Doningtonians, or Old Dons, for anyone over the age of 18, and the Young Dons for those who are younger. The Young Dons were established in 1996. The Old Dons play in the Saturday Boston League, and Young Dons on a Sunday in the Mid-Lincolnshire Junior League. Fun football-related fact here, by the way. Donington's school football team was one of the first ever to play in the FA Cup. Back in the 1871-72 season, they were drawn in the first round of the competition against the prominent Scottish team, Queen's Park, and as neither team could agree a date, both progressed to the second round. Speaking of schools, there are two in Donington, and both of them sport the name Cowley. This here is the Donington Cowley Endowed Primary School, located right in front of the football pitches. The other is Cowley Academy, a non-selective secondary school for pupils aged 11 to 16. Let's make our return to the main street via Flinders Park. The park was created as a result of that conceited community effort to bring Flinders home and rebury him in his birthplace. The village community set up a group called the Flinders Founders to make Donington a better place for young people, and they created both this and Flinders Team Park. One can only imagine that if Matthew Flinders was alive now, he'd be proud of his community for this effort in his name. Flinders Park is a brilliant open community space and rightly takes pride of place in the centre of the village. Okay, if you walk straight through Flinders Park, you are back to the main street. You can see the Premier shop there, which we saw before we deviated away from the main road. So we're going to rejoin the main road now and complete that before we head back up towards the church. Turning back onto the main street, we pass both the fire station and the library before we come to another former pub along the route, the Black Swan. Donington can boast some rather unusual businesses, ones you wouldn't find in every village of its size. These include a timber windows manufacturer named George Barnsdale Limited, which employs approximately 100 people. It's one of the main employers in the village itself. As well as this, a fire prevention and security company has its head office in Donington too. Part of the business occupies the former Black Swan pub. It was originally 3 buildings, the earliest of which dates back to the late 18th century. It closed in 2012 temporarily and then on a permanent basis in 2014. Incidentally, Donington's other former pubs and inns are as follows: the Bottle and Glass, the Peacock Inn, the Red Cow Inn, the Rose and Crown, and the Sloop. Over the road is Donington Club. This is a snooker and gentlemen's club, but it was never originally built as such, and you can tell by its architectural style. It was originally a mill, and if you look closely, you can see it still retains its old pulley mechanism that was used for lowering bags of flour onto carts on the street below.
The next building along, that white one, used to be a pub. Called the Protection.
On the next corner we have Cowley Academy. In a formal sense, this is officially known as the Thomas Cowley High School. It's a mixed secondary with academy status, and since September 2022 it's been part of the South Lincolnshire Academy Trust. So where does the name Cowley come from? I can answer that. Landowner Thomas Cowley, by deed in 1701 and by will in 1711 and 1718, bequeathed his estate to endow an almshouse and a charity school to teach 20 poor children to read English and write. The free school established from this bequest eventually evolved into a grammar school, with the Cowley charity providing significant funding. By 1858, the school, which was governed by a scheme approved by the Master of the Rolls, John Romilly, also provided for an upper girls' school, a mixed elementary school, and an infant school. The grammar school held 80 pupils with an average attendance of 40. At the time, a new scheme was proposed to develop the girls' department with a yearly endowment of £25 to provide minor scholarships and accommodation for resident pupils, with the inclusion of teaching the art of cookery. The grammar and girls' upper school were not exclusive to Donington, but were open to pupils from the whole county, with fees being £4 yearly for boys and £3 for girls. The school covered 5 acres and included a residence for the masters and mistresses, a house for the headmaster, a recreation ground, a cricket field, a gymnasium, and playgrounds. Cowley held grammar school status until 1949. A secondary modern school was then established in its place using the Thomas Cowley name, which in 1995 became a comprehensive secondary school. In September 2006, the comprehensive school was designated a specialist technology college, and in 2012 it converted to academy status. Now, as we know already, Matthew Flinders was the most notable former pupil, but as far as its alumni go, he's definitely not alone when it comes to those people know. Other former pupils of this school include Donald Bruce, better known as Baron Bruce of Donington. He was a soldier, businessman and politician. Eric Houghton, the footballer and later football manager, also went to school here, as did Sarah Swift, the founder of the Royal College of Nursing. Okay, so if you walk past the school, this road will take you all the way back to the church. You can see on my left, your right hand side there, that is a field which leads across to Northorpe, where we began this video quite a long time ago now. And the church hall is the last landmark on our route. You can just about see the church spire on the left there. The church hall is kind of opposite the church, just here on this corner. That's the last thing to talk about. After walking the length of Church Lane, almost returning to the start, we have one final landmark, the Church Hall, which bears a striking resemblance to a similar building we saw some time ago in Halton-le-Moor. Well, I think it does anyway. This is a building identified as of historical interest by the South Holland District Council local list. It's a good example of the style of building of its period and survives with only a few changes to its original construction. Single story and made of red brick with a concrete render, it has a small porch with an arched wooden door at its centre. Although there's no definitive date of construction, it's probably late 19th or early 20th century in date. Some way out of the village to the west is the site of a former railway station. This was Donington Road on the line between Sleaford and Spalding. It closed in 1951 for passengers and 1964 for freight. The line is still open though. It had served Donington since 1882, but these days residents of the village have to travel to reach the nearest station. Luckily, they are very close. The two nearest are at Spalding and Boston, and they have regular services to Peterborough, Lincoln, Derby, Sheffield, Leicester, Nottingham and London. In 2008, Hull Trains proposed reopening Donington Road Station as a railhead to Boston for a direct Lincoln to London service. This didn't happen though, and to this day, Donington remains a stationless village. Now, driving away from the village means passing a former windmill. Known as Baxters Mill, it was standing by 1819 and possibly dates from the 18th century. The sails were removed in 1913 and the mill was then dismantled. It had 2 common and 2 spring shuttered sails, which drove 2 pairs of stones. The tower has been shortened to 3 stories in height and has a conical roof. It was used as a store in 1977. With Donington in the books, we're now making our way south towards Spalding and deeper into the fens. The next 3 episodes all feature villages that are much smaller than Donington, but in all cases they cover areas which take in a lot of interesting hamlets. Some of them are vitally important to the fens. First up, it's one of the few villages in Lincolnshire beginning with the letter Q. See you there. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.